I am really excited to talk about Flutter today and to have Matt here with me. Like Russ said, I started Motion Mobs 9 years ago, and the significance of that today's conversation, and it was 18 months after the inception of the App Store. And so app development in general has changed completely in the last 9 years. When we started the company in 2010, a lot of the conversations that we would have with clients and the decisions that CTOs and CIOs across the country were making is really on, is the App Store here to stay? Is mobile just something that's trendy? Are people really going to use their phones this much? You have to think about that in context. Most people still had flip phones at that point. Apple and Android were just starting to get conversions to smartphones. They introduced this App Store and it was completely new to everyone at that time. So the idea that employees or consumers were going to start using apps to make major purchasing decisions, or to engage with them, or to enter their bank account information, or to have anything that would be considered secure on the devices was really unusual at that point. When the App Store was launched by Apple and Android, they had very specific guidelines for how they wanted these apps developed, and they each created their own languages, rules and guidelines for launching those to the store. And so over the years, we have used native app development, following those guidelines and following those code bases for our company. The challenge with that is it's two different code bases, and it's really two completely different developers with different skill sets. It also increased cost. It took a long time, it was expensive to launch apps to market, and then as you were maintaining the apps, if there was an issue on, for example, an Android app, the same issue may not present on the iPhone app that you had. So you had to have your Android developer go into your Android code base and kind of make those decisions, make any changes that they needed, and then likewise see if the issue was going to present itself on Apple. So Matt had quite the challenge over the last 9 years of doing that, of managing two sets of developers who were constantly looking at two code bases for every mobile project that we had. About a year ago, I guess Flutter's been in beta for 1 year, and we've been working with Flutter for about 3 years. So we've been working with Flutter for about 3 years. We started working with Flutter when Google first announced it and put it into alpha. And one of the biggest reasons and causes for that was to try to be as efficient as possible, but we still had extremely high standards for how we wanted to produce apps for our clients, and we wanted to make sure it was the right decision for us. So when they first introduced it, we were skeptical. We wanted to make sure that we could still create native applications, but we were really attracted to the idea, better late than never, so we were attracted to the idea of just having a single code base and really making maintenance more efficient. So we were thinking about that decision. We were looking at two different factors. We were thinking about internal users, really meaning employees of companies, and anyone who is creating an app internally for their employees to engage with that app. And then on the other end of the spectrum, thinking about external users, any of their customers or consumers who are buying products from them on the App Store. Those applications have very different functions and work differently, but still, for each project, had two separate code bases when we're developed natively. So for us, these are directly from Flutter. When they're marketing their program and their framework, they really talk about these 4 factors that they've built into their framework to make it easy to use and to get developers across the country to start engaging with their framework. The first is reach and retention. It is notoriously hard to get consumers or even employees to be actively engaged in any app that you're creating. It is not a build it and they will come model anymore. It's not 9 years ago. People have many apps on their phone, and encouraging users to be engaged with the content that you're delivering is a huge part of that. So for us, thinking about how our clients are retaining the customers they have, whether it's their own employees or their customers, is a huge part of what's making this successful. When we're talking to them for the first time, we're not talking about frameworks and we're not talking about code bases. We're talking about what metrics for their business that they care about. So then Matt has the challenge of translating that and saying, okay, well, if they're looking to grow by these numbers on the retention side, what does that mean we have to do with the app in order for them to fulfill that? The other aspect of Flutter that's been really impressive to us is the high quality look and feel. Flutter is not the first framework to come out or to be produced where you could have a single code base. So there have been several other frameworks that have come out before, and it's part of, I think, what made us skeptical about this product at first, is we really wanted to make sure that any application that we were building was professionally built and had a high quality look and feel and was truly a native application that followed the App Store's guidelines. Again, with it being notoriously hard with retention, how a user interacts with your app and how easy it is for them to take an action is a huge part of it. In the morning, like I use Chick-fil-A and Starbucks apps really frequently. If it's easier for me to go into Chick-fil-A and Starbucks and buy my coffee or biscuit, I'm going to do that. And I'm only going to use the app if they make that easier for me as a consumer. And that's the same across the board. If there's an easier path to do it, consumers are going to take it. And if your app isn't the easiest path with the fewest clicks to really engage them, then they're going to look somewhere else. Time to market. So this is huge for developers. If you have two different developers working in two different code bases, maintaining two different code bases, and taking a long period of time to get their products to market, obviously that can make clients frustrated, can make consumers frustrated who are really looking for an easier path. And this also applies to maintenance. So after you launch the app to the store and the app is growing and it's doing really well, only one issue that is presented on either app store can really hurt your retention rate if you're not keeping up with that. And that, in a native environment, requires someone to go into each code base to fix those issues. And then lastly, affordability. Really, that's what affordability plays into, is it's so much easier for a company to go into a single code base instead of two code bases to address these issues. This just gives you an idea of some of the things that we've been discussing so far as the differences between native and cross-platform and the paths to get there. If you think about native, you're just working in two separate environments trying to create a quality product that is consistent on both sides, even though it's completely different. If you think about cross-platform, you're working in one code base, but you are often making sacrifices on the look and feel. And so what Google built in Flutter is so exciting for us because they really said, neither of these are good enough. Like, it's not good enough to have two different sets of developers. It's not good enough to have to maintain that every time you're going through a maintenance issue. And likewise, we don't want to sacrifice the quality, look and feel, the benefits that you get with developing in those native languages. So for us, obviously, it being backed by Google was a huge factor. It gave us a lot of reassurance that this is an enormous company who is fully supporting this framework. It makes it very easy for us to integrate any application that we build on Flutter with other Google products like Google Analytics, A/B testing. Any reporting that we want to integrate with is so much easier because they're building both products and they make it as easy as possible to use more of their products. That's been a huge factor for us. It is native compiling code, so even though you're working in one code base, at the end you're getting two truly native apps to submit to each prospective app store. I'm going to let Matt talk a little bit more about stateful hot reload because it's one of the most popular features in Flutter, and he'll do it more justice than I will. And then they have all of these themes included. So going to their framework and just being a part of the entire Flutter community, where if we have any questions from other developers who are working with Flutter, being part of that's been a huge factor for our company. Speaking of other developers in the community, these are just a few of the companies who are using Flutter now. Hamilton has been a really exciting case study for us because they just have so many active users. They have really completely changed the numbers. They really completely changed the numbers as far as active users and retention. I don't know if you guys have heard about it or not, but they have an active lottery every day, and they can have 1 million users at one time in their lottery looking for Hamilton tickets. I really like Hamilton, but I will admit I'm not that committed of a fan. And so, but seeing that as a case study on Flutter is exciting for us because there are a few apps on the App Store that have that type of traffic all at the same time. And for them to be able to maintain the pressures of that traffic and everything that comes with it has been really impressive. Alibaba is an enormous e-commerce company, and so it's also a very different but really great example. They have a lot of infrastructure as a company already, as you might imagine. So much like Amazon, they have their own e-commerce store, they've had an app before. When they started implementing Flutter, they actually implemented it as a feature set. So they kept their native code bases in place because it was just so much money and such a huge investment for them. And then every new feature that they rolled out on Flutter. So it works in that environment too. Abbey Road Studio, they created their first app of this kind. I think that was this year or last June, 2018, I think, with Flutter. And so they created a completely new app for their studio where if you were a musician, you could use their app to help upload your music into the app and then record your lyrics over it. So it actually helped from a songwriting perspective, and they were merging the two at the same time. Both Square and Groupon, which I assume all of you are familiar with, have started rolling out features using Flutter as well. So they're continuing to grow their user base. And as we're in the Flutter community, if we have any questions or if we're concerned about a certain scale or something that we're doing in the app, we can put questions out and get responses from these development teams about their experience with Flutter and what they're doing with this product. So before I turn it over to Matt to do a demo for Flutter and to talk a little bit more about what it looks like to use Flutter and to have it in action, do you guys have any questions for me or for Matt? Really, Thomas? Nothing?
I have questions.
Do you have one?
Sure. So, okay, so I've used like Xamarin and like Cordova a little bit, right?
Yep.
And you get to a point where those, like at some level in that code base, the iOS and Android have to diverge a little bit. So like compared to those, you say that Flutter, because this uses Dart, is that
it does.
the language? Okay,
Dart
so what, like, do you have less about divergence in code base with this? Like significantly less than those others? Okay. So kind of like at what level do you get, would you say, do you get to where you start learning? When you're like manipulating some very vendor specific camera API or?
So the way that,
No.
The way that Flutter has kind of gotten around that is they have created this, so Dart has the concept of packages, which is how you get your libraries and your frameworks and the like. Well, Flutter adds to that the concept of a plugin. And so a plugin is basically a package, but it also contains native specific code. And so it'll have, typically, if it's well written, it'll have both sides, right? So for instance, the camera API you were talking about is actually a Flutter supported, like the Flutter team supports it. It's one of the, it's actually in the Flutter code base.
Okay.
But so on one side they'll have that in the project itself you have an iOS folder and you have an Android folder, and anything that you need to do like configuration wise, right, you can do in those two. But there are also plugins that you use that will, for instance, using CocoaPods and Gradle and the like, to import those packages natively on those sides, and then it wraps them in Dart, okay, using what it calls platform channels. And then you talk to the native side through those platform channels. Normally they wrap it in a way that it feels like you're just using that library.
Okay.
Or whatever it is. They standardize it really well. Is that?
Yeah, that's good.
One thing I'll add to that is when we started using Flutter 3 years ago, Matt was the only person on our team who had ever used Dart before. And so that was my biggest concern, was like, how are we going to find other developers who can learn Dart? What does that look like for our team? And like, how is Matt going to manage this by himself? And the biggest factor for me, or the biggest, I guess, shock for me, was everyone got up to speed on Dart really quickly. In fact, it was almost like a blimp. It was like, oh yeah, everyone's writing in Dart now, and I was like, what? Okay. So that was a huge factor, was like how easy they make it for people to write into that language. Alibaba has a really good case study in the Flutter community on why they chose to go with Flutter and why they implemented that. And it talks to all of their engineers, and every single one of them was like, yeah, I'd never used Flutter before, and I started using it, and this is what I did in the first week. And it was really impressive to hear that. Does anybody else have any questions? Awesome. Do you want to go ahead and...
Sure.